Hello and welcome to the Majlis, the podcast by Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, focusing on Central Asia. I'm Mohammed Tahir, your host here in Washington, D.C. So Kyrgyzstan held another competitive elections, and the losing candidate heard saying that he would accept the outcome. Even though there have been various allegations of wrongdoings during and before the elections day, if things turn out the way it seems, this would be a remarkable development given in the rest of Central Asia, power is transferred from one leader to the next only after the death of the sitting president. So almost all votes counted. Let's recall highlights of the process leading up to the elections day. Also, let's look into the future and try to understand where is Kyrgyzstan headed under Surunbay Jeenbekov. To discuss all these questions, I'm joined by Riskeldi Satke, independent Kyrgyz journalist based in Bishkek. Also from Bishkek joining us is Edil Baysalov, political activist, and Bruce Pannier, editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Central Asia blog. Kishlok Owozi is with us from Prague. Welcome on board, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.
Very nice to have you. So let's start with you, Riskeldi. So what is the latest? I guess by now it's clear that Jeenbekov got the seat. So how is the atmosphere in the country?
I'm in Osh right now, so I can tell you for sure that in Osh it's quiet. We're not seeing any activities, protesting, or anything related to elections, except for the fact that it was very busy yesterday. But today it's quiet, business as usual. Aside from that, there are news coming out of Western province in Talas that we have protests, local residents in Talas are protesting against the outcome of the election. And that's the news at the moment. We'll see what happens from now on.
Okay. Edil, where are you? Are you in Bishkek?
Yes, I am in Bishkek.
So tell us, please, what's going on there?
I think it's a sense of course, major disappointment on part of 12 candidates and who lost, and their supporters. And then, of course, great relief and joy to the incumbent power, both Atambayev and the incoming president Surunbay Jeenbekov. They probably feel very proud of their campaign. But I think that the fact that favorite candidate Emirbek Babanov conceded his defeat and called off any protesters, he warned against provocations, but he hasn't placed a telephone call to the winning candidate. And the reason behind that is, of course, we all don't know if Atambayev and Jeenbekov, they are going to follow through on the pre-election rhetoric that they are going to be imprisoning candidate Babanov and other leading politicians, or was it just talk? And that's the reason of quite high tension in the country.
Interesting. Bruce, coming to you, in leading up to weekend's election day, we had at least two podcasts within a month talking about Kyrgyz election. In both of that, predictions were that this election would go to the second round. Now you have a victory for Jeenbekov in the first round. Was it a surprise from your point of view?
Oh, absolutely. I didn't, from polls that they had shown before campaigning started, it appeared that Babanov had a pretty good lead going into this, and I understand that it was tightened a little bit, actually quite a bit over the coming weeks, or the last few weeks. But I never would have expected that Jeenbekov would be able to pull off more than 50% in the first round. I mean, it just shows that, as we saw, certainly during the last, 10, 15 days of the campaigning, they just unloaded everything they had against Babanov, everything they could think of. That was why they won.
Riskeldi, how do you look into the victory of Jeenbekov from the point where you are, and also the fact that you are in Osh? How Osh voted in this election?
Well, I think it was expected that Osh would be a tough battleground for Babanov. And Jalalabad probably, I predicted that, but Batken province would go for Jeenbekov. But the polls would show up probably tight race. Many were expecting in Osh and Jalalabad, more so in Osh, I believe. But the outcome surprised many, and I agree with Bruce that I think all of us were surprised because 72, as I know, for Jeenbekov and 18 for Babanov was not the true picture, I believe, because beginning Sunday morning all the way to the end of Sunday, there were steady reports coming out from Osh province, specifically from Osh, linking to violations. I think today's press conference, OSCE press conference, confirmed that there was a line of violations in Osh province specifically. And I think that confirmed that election was not upheld to the fullest standard, as the president promised.
Idil, let's take your point in this. The fact that Jeenbekov has won and Babanov accepted defeat, although saying that there were violations, and also that was confirmed, as Rizkaldi was just saying, by the international observers there. So what was the determining factor leading Jeenbekov to the victory from your point of view?
Well, yes, of course, I would love to also state that we all knew that the incumbent parties, they wanted to achieve victory in the first round, because the second round, everybody else would mobilize again around the opposition candidate. But I did not expect that the first round victory would be proclaimed so vividly. And of course, geographically, it was concentrated yesterday, all the news about violence against journalists, against observers, against candidate representatives, they all were coming from the city of Osh and around the area. But, you know, what was important that Babanov did accept his defeat, because he did not achieve high turnout around the country. It was a very quite, comparatively speaking, low turnout. Lots of voters did not go either because they were not registered or they did not pass this biometric registration. But I think the major reason of his defeat was that he did not differentiate himself against the other candidate. Both of them were seen by the electorate as candidates of Atambayev. And refusal of Babanov to criticize Atambayev, refusal of Babanov to accept endorsements from the leaders of the opposition, including imprisoned Emirbek Tekebayev, for example, or including such major politicians as Melis Mirzakhmatov, they all were prohibited from publicly endorsing Emirbek Babanov, strictly by him, because he did not want to irritate Atambayev. For example, people like myself, although we were cheering him in the social media and elsewhere, we never were invited to attend his rallies, for example. But I think he did not expand his base, his electoral base. And we all know that presidential elections are not won only on the positive agenda. And he always prides himself on campaigns on positivity platform, on the future. But he did not confront his opponent. He did not criticize the outgoing president. And even after Atambayev 2 weeks ago started his campaign of basically assassinating his character by mentioning him speaking both in the media, behind the doors, and other things, Babanov refused until 1 p.m. of the election day to confront those accusations. And so I think many of the voters, both in Osh, in Naryn, in Bishkek, elsewhere, for them, at the end of the day, Babanov and Jeenbekov looked the same. And they just voted, I think, for the safer choice, I guess.
Rizkaldi, what's your point in what Idil has just said about Babanov's inability to confront his opponents, especially Atambayev, who has seen fully supporting Jeenbekov in the entire process?
I think Babanov had a pretty good run for the most part, except he had many people say that he had two mistakes in the process. The one first, when he went to Kazakhstan to meet the Kazakh president, and the second one when he was meeting with voters in Osh, outside of Osh, in the place called Onadir. These are the two, probably not the major ones, but mistakes that he made in the process, and the SDPK front runner campaign, they used it to the fullest extent. I think that hurt him a little bit. And also, he should have more focused on the northern provinces. I'm talking about the Issyk and Naryn province. It was surprising to me to find out that Naryn was dropped by 20 or 30%. I can't say top of my head right now. And then after that, Issyk was a little surprising too, because he lost by 10% almost. And the rest of the provinces in the south, as I said, they were decided. Batken province, especially, was decided way before than campaign started, and probably that's his mistake, in my opinion. As far as his opposition stance against the president, I believe he had a strategy on how to win the election. But he said it this morning, that there were mistakes made also. He said his campaign made a strategic mistakes on how to deal with the administrative resources. And he said that they could have done better with that approach, but he said that his campaign will collect more information, and then they will try to work this out in the next 6 years or so. And I think overall he had not a bad campaign, but let's not forget that the election in the South was heavily abused, in my personal opinion. Administrative resources were heavily used in Jalalabad and Osh province. I guess these are the major factors why he lost the election this time.
Okay, Bruce, obviously there are many factors, what Adil has just mentioned, and also Rizkeldi. One factor, a meeting between Nazarbayev and Babanov. In your opinion, how did this play out in the elections overall?
Well, it brought an outside player into the election that probably in the end was unwelcome. I mean, certainly in the past, I believe, I forget which article I was reading, but, Atambayev, when he was running for president in 2011, met with then Prime Minister Putin ahead of those elections, and I mean, so this has kind of been the routine. Nazarbayev is seen as a benevolent leader of a neighboring country. So in theory, this shouldn't have hurt Babanov's chances that much. The election rules have been changed a little bit since the 2011 election. So of course, the Atambayev and others were quick to point out that this meeting shouldn't have happened. It should never have been publicized. Why was Nazarbayev, meddling in Kyrgyz internal politics, especially in election politics? Since I'm not on the ground, I don't know. I know some people. I can imagine people that are leaning more toward nationalism would have disapproved of this meeting, raised a bunch of issues from Babanov's past. He started out as a successful businessman now, but his success began in Kazakhstan, and he was briefly the holder of a Kazakh passport, which he offered a rather unconvincing explanation for. But and of course his wife is ethnic Kazakh, so there was a lot of things that some people brought up right away to make it look like he was in the pocket of the Kazakh government or some inner circle oligarchs in Kazakhstan. And in fact, right up to the Atambayev said Friday, that he was essentially just a flunky for Kazakhstan. So it did backfire, but it's not unheard of. It's not unprecedented for Kyrgyz presidential candidates to meet with, influential and recognizable leaders of other countries. It's just that this election, according to the rules, that wasn't supposed to happen. So I suppose you could say in the end it backfired for him. But and the unfortunate thing is it spiraled into a whole different area where all of a sudden it really heavily impacted Kazakh-Kyrgyz relations. And we see that the border is still not totally closed, but certainly traffic is not moving as it usually does. And it's going to be interesting to see how they can extricate themselves from this situation as long as Atambayev is in power, because he's done a lot of the damage, and he will be there until December when he steps down officially and Jayinbekov takes the oath of office. So, it was an unnecessary complication that was thrown into the election.
Yeah. Now,
Muhammad, can I just jump in and say that the only rule that was changed from 2011 was that you cannot use in your political campaign, photos of your meetings or endorsements by foreign leaders. That was prohibited. But meeting itself, it cannot be prohibited. When president, a very well respected and leader from the most important neighbor with brotherly ties, invites you for a cup of tea, everybody would accept. But Babanov could not imagine that Atambayev not only would he criticize him for that, but actually would burn all bridges to Nazarbayev and would criticize him personally on air and raise such a high stakes in his campaign that, nobody could have predicted that. I would repeat actually that Babanov should have responded to that criticism by taking direct hits against Atambayev. But he refused to mention his name.
Why he did that, Idil? I just wanted to ask that question earlier, but why he was so hesitant to respond to those kind of criticism then?
Because Babanov knows very well our president, as it was recollected by the president himself yesterday at the press conference. They are very close. They used to be very close. Their wives are basically used to be like sisters. They had many, social moments together. And Babanov said that he asked Atambayev his blessing to run this campaign and asked only for one thing, to provide for free and fair elections. But, it was completely irrational. Atambayev yesterday also explained why was he so mad at Babanov and suddenly changed his mind about not running against him, not speaking against him. But basically, and again, it's from the field of irrational or absolutely, I would say, mad situation when Atambayev, turns out, was insulted by the tone of Babanov. We are all outside, we're criticizing Babanov for not taking a clear stand on Atambayev and for not criticizing him, for not mentioning the major scandals that occupy our, public opinion. For example, that disaster with Viglas, the glass factory from Czech Republic, or the purported sale of our top national treasure, Megacom telecommunications company, to the Russian lady who imports tea from Kenya. He never mentioned them. And still, Atambayev was insulted by the tone of Babanov's campaign, who was promising a more serious, a real fight with corruption. And Atambayev was saying, well, actually, I'm fighting corruption. Why are you criticizing me? And he started turning against him. And Babanov should have responded earlier, should have actually run a more decisive and confrontational campaign. And at the end, he still lost. But not only he lost the campaign, he lost his friendship of outgoing president. And maybe he risks, some major repressions against himself.
Okay, let's talk. Let's talk about the consequences in the second half. But before we go to the second part, just a minor question, Idil. As an outsider to Kyrgyz politics, I thought Nazarbayev always had a kind of this elderly figure in Kyrgyzstan, and that's why he was respected. So, but in this election, his meeting with Babanov kind of was counterproductive.
It was only because Atambayev violated every rule of the game. You don't criticize a president of your neighboring country. Good or bad. You don't tell the whole world that he steals money from his people. Who does that? Leader of Venezuela? Maybe. But I never can imagine even countries at war. They don't go call each other a thief or a liar. They don't accuse them of an older age. No one could have predicted what Atambayev was doing. And of course, Nazarbayev is loved by the Kyrgyz people. And actually, the meeting of him with Babanov would be seen as a blessing if Atambayev decided this to frame it as a major crime against the Kyrgyz people.
Okay. Now that Jeenbekov is the next president, so what does this mean for Kyrgyzstan? And where is the country headed under his leadership? We will continue the debate discussing this and many other questions shortly. Hey everyone, before we get into the second part of the show, just a quick reminder that if you really like Majlis podcast, there's a real chance that you will also like my other radio show that's called Gandhara Podcast. The show discusses latest developments in Pakistan and Afghanistan from local perspective. And the podcast is published in every second week on Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty's Gandhara website. It's a totally must-follow discussion for foreign policy nerds with interest in the region. first, let me recap the debate that today on the Majlis, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Central Asia podcast, we are discussing the weekend's presidential elections in Kyrgyzstan and what does this say about the future direction of the country. Joining me in the discussion are Rizkel Desatka, Kyrgyz journalist based in Bishkek. Also from Bishkek, joining us is Edil Baysala, political activist, and Bruce Pannier, editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Central Asia blog, Kishlok Owazi. He is based in Prague. I am Mohammed Tahir, host of the Majlis here in Washington, D.C. Welcome back, gentlemen, to the Majlis. So, Rizkel, so where are the candidates today, especially the frontrunners, and what are they doing?
Well, the last information that we have, Babanov gave a press conference this morning, and I believe Jembekov is in Bishkek as well. Mm-hmm. And I believe the election is over, and Babanov, as many as guests just have said, that he accepted the result of the election. Yesterday evening, many were having questions as to what's next from now on, since many were expecting Babanov to win, I believe. I think many had this feeling that Babanov is likely to be the president, but that didn't happen. And many have questions at the moment, and I think some of the opposition members, and actually one candidate on TV, actually on Azatik today, he said that these election results may lead to a disaster or a conflict, and he was specifically mentioning 2009 election. Or if the new president-elect, Jembekov, will change the governance and will fight corruption, and he will break with corrupt figures in his circle, then probably he has a chance. But many are doubting because, well, let's just say Jembekov is a representative of the old way of SDPK. SDPK is pro-president, pro-government, and many are just not expecting any much of a change at this point. And so I guess we'll see what happens. But today, something interesting was happening in Talas. As I mentioned earlier, people started protesting.
Is it still going on?
Is it still? I don't know if
no,
it's
no,
still...
no. It was addressed by
Babanov
campaign and his personal representative. They called it off, and it wasn't really. It was spontaneous. You have to understand that more than 90% of voters of Talas voted for Babanov, and as Rizkel is saying, everybody was expecting a Babanov victory, and it was spontaneous, short. Just a meeting to let air out, but it's nothing serious. They have gone home.
Rizkel, just to continue with you, so Babanov also kind of said, I think today, that he is having a separate vote count. Should we expect anything coming out from that?
Well, that's what he said, and I think he is right, because he specifically mentioned Karasu district and Karakulja district. These are the two districts where his representatives having problem with the voting data. And I think that's where actually the most violations were recorded. And whether he will get it or no, I guess we'll find out. But going back to the protesting thing, well, it's just happened. It's obviously the election results triggered, and Babanov himself said it, that he has nothing to do with the protests. Yeah. But the major point is, from now on, what's going to happen? That's the question, because whether it will lead to something bigger or it will just die out, we don't know, simply. But I think the developments from now on depend on how the people will interpret the election results. Because everybody knows that there was a power abuse, administrative resources, and I think many now understand that it was not clean, it was unfair. But that's the thing, if Babanov says that he's not going to overthrow the government, it doesn't mean that the people will listen to him. Maybe it will start it off somewhere in the provinces, maybe not, we don't know. But it'll be interesting to watch.
Okay, so looking to the future, Bruce, maybe you want to take this question. So that Jembekov is now elected as the next president. So what does this mean to Kyrgyzstan?
Well, I got a real problem with some of this stuff going in. First, and Adil already heard me speak earlier, but the first thing I would point out here is that in the history of Kyrgyz presidential elections, Jayinbekov received the smallest amount of votes. I mean, he barely crossed the 50% barrier. His major opponent got more than a third of the vote. So this is a different situation than we've seen before in the country. Where it's clear that pretty much almost half the country did not vote for the guy who's elected president. Now, Jayinbekov, his lackluster campaign, which really didn't have very many moments, and it was kind of thin on promises besides the usual, I'll fight corruption and stuff like that. The thing that I heard him say the most was he was going to continue the policies of Atambayev. But, I've talked with some of the people here in Prague and other people that know about Kyrgyzstan, and the big question is, like, what exactly was Atambayev's policy? We don't really know. I mean, if you look back at 6 years of Atambayev, what are his accomplishments? Well, the country stayed stable. Well, that's good. They didn't suffer the same kind of economic problems some of the other countries did, but then why? No one would expect that they would, because they're not a gas or oil exporter. So why would they? They didn't have that kind of exposure. So they really haven't, under Atambayev, they haven't progressed too much. They kind of stayed where it was, and things stayed more or less stable, but it really didn't progress. And Adil mentioned they had this problem with the hydropower plant deal with the Czech company, so they're still on the hook for $37 million they owe Rusgidro for work that was already done. They're no closer to getting the hydropower plants done. Their economy is still in exactly the same shape it was. There's no sign that anything is coming in soon that's going to jumpstart the economy and give it a boost. They have increasing security problems. I don't know to what extent that's legitimate, but the fact is that after that bombing in St. Petersburg in early April, when the FSB identified the bomber himself as being a citizen of Kyrgyzstan and other citizens of Kyrgyzstan as having been involved, there's all these detentions, arrests and stuff that go on. Now it's become practically a weekly thing, but I mean, it's happening all the time. So this situation hasn't improved either. So continuing Atambayev's course, I'm like, what does that mean exactly? Can the country keep just kind of drifting along like it is, or is there some idea to actually improve the situation, which I really didn't get out of Jayinbekov's campaign?
Eskilde, what's your thinking on that? So what Jayinbekov has in mind when he says he will continue the policies of Atambayev?
Well, he said it during the campaign trail that he will raise the salaries for teachers, for medics, I believe, for the people who work for the state. But we don't really know how he's going to do it, because the government is heavy. The last time I read the debt, Kyrgyzstan's debt is over $4 billion right now. With the GDP in 2015 with 6.5 billion, I don't know what kind of economic plans they have, except from what Atambayev did in the last 6 years. And then Jayinbekov said that he will continue Atambayev's reforms. And Bruce said it correct, and we don't know. Where probably the country will be drifting forward as it did during Atambayev. And I actually agree with Bruce that we didn't hear much about developing economy and bringing jobs back from Jayinbekov campaign. But on the other side, Babanov was promising certain benefits, like bringing migrants back, ending the corruption, and everything that he basically was promising during the campaign. But the Jayinbekov, I believe, his first thing right now is to fix the problem at the Kazakh border with the Kyrgyz-Kazakh relations. That's the biggest problem at the moment for him, and how it's going to go down in Kazakhstan, I don't really know. I have no idea, and I think it will be really tough because he represents Atambayev's type of governance, and he's Atambayev's successor. Everybody knows that, and we don't really know how Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan will fix the relations. And I think that's the major question at everybody's mind at the moment.
How much of time he has to fix this, Rizkeldi?
He has to fix...
The Kazakh crisis, yeah.
It was just announced today that his first visit will be to Kazakhstan. And, Atambayev will be in office till December. So no one is expecting that Kazakhstan will be, probably they will soften up a little bit. But as far as completely reversing the border problem That's many are skeptical because Atambayev pissed off the Kazakh government to the point where Kazakh government started banning the milk products from Kyrgyzstan, which is unheard of. And that's the question. And I mean, hopefully they could fix it within a month or probably weeks, but we'll see what happens.
Your thoughts on that, Edil, the fact that Kyrgyzstan relies on Kazakhstan in so many levels, how much of time the Atambayev administration or the incoming administration of Jeenbekov has to fix this issue?
Actually, I suggested today that elected President-elect Jeenbekov flies to Astana within days or most certainly next week. He should not wait coming to office before he starts speaking to Nazarbayev. Nazarbayev is an elder, and it is up to Jeenbekov to plead with him and to apologize, at least privately, if not publicly, because that's what Kazakhstan wants. Kazakhstan's leader, we know how much he invests in his prestige and reputation and how much pride he takes in his standing in the world. No one ever has said these words to President Nazarbayev, and we know what happened to those who accused him of this type of crimes. But any other sovereign leader speaking so harshly about Kazakhstan, you bet we are going to be paying this very, very heavy price until President Nazarbayev feels that the matter is exhausted. Actually, Kazakhstan has unlimited space for escalation. You know, it can be milk, it can be meat. Actually, Prime Minister Sagintayev, in his response to Atambayev, mentioned a few problematic areas. They can shut down Chinese re-export. They can shut down all type of goods produced in Kyrgyzstan. Because guess what? We joined the Eurasian Economic Union and we foolishly signed to comply with the heavy technical regulations. And of course, we do not comply. For example, our meat, is not processed at these modern plants. Most of the meat is cut at home, and you talk about the sanitary requirements. So Kazakhstan has practically unlimited way to escalate these tensions. They can shut down airspace, and it's not going to be exhausted until they demanded public apology from Atambayev. They know they're not going to get it. But Jeenbekov should travel to Astana or decide this issue as soon as possible. Because guess what? Ruskeldi was discussing our foreign debt. Do you know that we are entering the peak of our payments on servicing this foreign debt? Most of the debt that was received by us in the early 2000s or sometime later, they had this grace period of 10, 15 years or what, and we'll be entering the highest peak of servicing this foreign debt. It will require up to, I don't remember exactly, but maybe $300 million starting this December. And it will last maybe 18 to 24 to 30 months. It will be a very heavy toll on our budget. Many people are predicting that the government will have to devaluate the Kyrgyz som, because Atambayev takes so much pride on keeping the exchange rate while ruble and tenge were plunging. He was, in his own mind, our economy was succeeding because Kyrgyz som was so stable. And I also would like to add that early next year, we will be going into a very high social unrest because, again, the Social Democratic Party and Atambayev, Jeenbekov administration, they were, prime minister and president, they initiated that very poor families used to receive this child support payments, and now they all abolished. It will be not only very poor, but all children of this country, even, millionaires or members of parliament, they will be all eligible to receive child support payments, but only up to 3 years old. And imagine hundreds of thousands of Kyrgyz families who will be expecting to receive very little, but still very necessary money at the end of the month. They will be refused. It will cause great unrest in February, March.
Yeah, very interesting points. So in the immediate future, it seems to be the crisis with Kazakhstan is the biggest challenge Jeenbekov has to deal with.
But Mohammed, I think the biggest challenge, what I mentioned in the beginning, the biggest question at the moment on everyone's mind, including, disclaimer on my own, it is if Atambayev is going to follow through his promise that until December 1st, while he's in power, he still has 47 days in office, he will clean the plate of the old politicians. He was promising to imprison dozens of us, and even Babanov. And so we had a very exhausting campaign. We have some appointments abroad. Babanov mentioned that he wants to take a week off and just to relieve. But he said, I cannot leave abroad because it will be seen or as I'm running away. And the same about me, And so we need to get a message. Is Atambayev imprisoning us? Or will he use his remaining 47 days on something more productive?
Riskilde, maybe let's take your note on that. So Atambayev's biggest struggle was the election of someone that he could rely on, in which he succeeded. Isn't he calm yet?
Well, that's the question about Atambayev. Many are trying to understand what has he done in the last few weeks.
Yeah.
Because from literally no problem, we went into a big problem with Kazakhstan because of Atambayev. Then obviously he had a nervous breakdown, and I think many interpreted it as his personal problem with the election, with the campaign that Babanov had. And I think many were feeling that he had a strain because of I believe many suspect that he was unsure whether his candidate will be elected. And I think all this is leading to the point where I think we'll see what happens from now on. But it's unpredictable to say what Atambayev is going to do until December. The thing is that no one was expecting that he would deliver his disastrous speech on Kazakhstan. And now we have the problem. And then now he's not even backing down. He's doubling up, and he's even speaking out even more. So election is over.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen now? And he's not going to apologize, obviously. We all understand that. And who is going to do that? Dildy just said that Jeenbekov probably he needs to do so. At the same time, Kazakh government is not likely to receive an apology in private. They will need some kind of public angle here. I don't know how it's going to work out because Kazakhstan is one of the biggest countries in the region. And then the Kazakh leadership obviously is feeling that it was disrespected by the Kyrgyz president. So I guess it remains a question. We don't know at this point.
Okay. So we are already over time. Bruce, final wise points from you. In fact, the election is over and we do not see any immediate trouble. Kyrgyzstan is known for, it's a success. So how you see the future going for the Kyrgyz administration, for Atambayev, for Jeenbekov, and also for Babanov?
Well, the first thing the Kyrgyz government would be wise to just leave Babanov alone. There's no sense in creating a political martyr here. They already have Tekibayev in jail. It'd be pushing to start jailing some of these people right away. You hit on the right thing. At the end of the day, the most important thing about yesterday's election was that it was held peacefully and it was accepted by everyone that did not win. And so far, it's only not even 24 hours, but so far so good because this is an important model and an important lesson. Now, on the other hand, there's not much that Jeenbekov can do to really improve the situation in Kyrgyzstan, certainly very quickly. If Atambayev, he's gone back and forth saying he was going to be involved in politics. He wasn't going to be involved in politics. I would prefer that he did the latter and was just not involved in politics. If the Jeenbekov government starts to look like an Atambayev-controlled government with more and more people from the Social Democratic Party getting in and things like that, it's just going to be like the problems we saw under Akayev and Bakiev, where the people are going to start to go, wait a minute, we got, essentially just this one group that's, grabbing more and more power in the country. And again, like I said, Jayinbekov did not receive an overwhelming mandate from the masses, so to speak. So he goes into this, really walking a tightrope, and he's going to have to be real careful in the future. Like I said, I don't know who he can turn to economically, but he certainly can't be seen to be Atambayev's puppet or to be courting favor from Atambayev's inner circle and essentially just recreating the Atambayev government under a new name.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bruce Pannier, editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Central Asia blog, Kishlak Ovozi. Also, big thanks goes to Rizkeldi Satka, independent Kyrgyz journalist based in Bishkek, and Edil Baysalov, political activist, for joining us today for your comments and insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you.
And this is it from me, Mohammed Tahir, host of the Majlis, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Central Asia podcast. Until next week, bye-bye.